Everyone, and thank you very much for being here. We'll be starting a little bit late. Good morning and welcome to this first part of our 22nd Conference of Europa Cinema. Traditionally, this morning is devoted to the country welcoming us. We did this 2 or 3 years ago, in fact, in 2019 in Lisbon. We did this in Bucharest in 2017. It's an opportunity for members of the network who so wish to learn more about the professional context, the institutions, the market, and also the cinema of another European country, because often they project their films on their screens. In France, there are many different topics we could address and debate. It's an opportunity to share all this with exhibitors from across Europe who are very keen to know a bit more about the country of the Lumière brothers. We don't have to go back that far, but I'd like to recall that this year we're celebrating the 30 years of Europa Cinema. The network was set up in 1992 with the support of the CNC and the media program. In 92, well, this brings me to more topical issues, one of them which we'll address this morning. In 1992, that was the worst year when it comes to national audiences in France. We reached the lowest level, 116 million entrances. The good news is that as of the following year, things went back up nicely, and we reached much bigger figures. Europa Cinema, right at the outset, helped to increase the number of tickets sold. There were many other decisive reasons, of course, and this morning there will be a certain number of professionals who will talk to us about the way in which they think that they can make the most of this history and, in a lasting way, secure audiences for the theatre. And these are topics we'll be addressing this morning in this room. I'll now give the floor to Laurent Cotillon, director of Le Film Français, who would like to welcome and thank for having agreed to moderate the 2 panels for this morning with the contribution of the guests who will be taking the floor. Thank you, Frédéric. Thank you for having entrusted this task to me. It's a great pleasure for me to work with you and the team. Now, what are we going to do this morning? First of all, we'll take stock of the situation on the French market, distribution, exhibition, etc. And then we'll go on to the second roundtable. To begin the morning, it's my pleasure to welcome, please give him a round of applause, the director of the CNC.
Avec Lionel, je demande d'accueillir Cécile Gaget, qui est du cinéma de Wild Bunch
BERTINET, who comes from Wild Bunch, France. Cécile Gaget, rather, Wild Bunch, France. And Marie Masmonteil, who's a producer, Elzevir Films. Please give her a warm welcome, in addition to Lionel BERTINET, Executive Director in charge of Cinema CNC France. Before we start to have our chat together, let's take stock of the French market, see how things are evolving and how it managed to survive the crisis. To this end, I'd like to call on MARTI, General Director, Comscore France, to take the floor and come and join us here on the rostrum. Eric, you have the floor. You can describe the French market at present. Thank you, Laurent. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, everybody. Yes. First of all, I'm very pleased to give you this introductory presentation as we start this network conference. As when Laurent Cotillon called me, he called me on the 2nd December, and he said, talk about the importance of the Battle of Austerlitz, because we're celebrating the anniversary of that. No, he said, talk about global box office. I'll give you some figures concerning numbers in France. Admissions. To put France in context, it's interesting also to talk more generally about the global market. In 2022, we have noted across the board that there's been a recovery in the activity of cinemas and in the number of admissions. However, but the recovery is uneven. So our partners put together these data which show that today the global market, world box office, is 35% lower than in the 3 preceding years before the crisis, 2017, 18, and 19. However, this minus 35%, that's $13 billion. We're talking about income and in dollars. The United States, the domestic market, stands at 33%. The remainder of the world, apart from China, is doing better, minus 31%, and China appears to be the market lagging behind most in terms of recovery because there are all these lockdowns owing to the health situation, minus 47%. Yet China was one of the driving forces behind global box office in 2017 to 2019. So this engine, this driving force, is broken down. Now let's talk about things that are closer to us. Here you have some European areas. One can see that in blue you have admissions to date in 2022 compared with the same period in 2021. In red, you have the same period in 2019, and then you have the average 2015 to 2019. 2018, 2019 were exceptional years for box office, so we've sort of smoothed this out and taken the average for these 3 years before the pandemic. France recovered nicely in 2022, 84% compared with 2021. And with Germany, these are the two countries that are faring quite well. Germany, minus 33 or minus 34, compared with the pre-COVID period, we're more at a minus 29. And in 2015-2019, minus 26. Spain and Italy are finding it harder. They're struggling more. Spain, 2022. Well, 2021 worked well. The recovery was strong, owing to the exceptional success of a Spanish film released during the summer, which beat quite a lot of records. And Italy, for the time being, is still lagging behind the other countries. It hasn't achieved even half of the admissions in previous years. Now, what about the situation elsewhere? In the Anglo-Saxon countries, well, they're a bit special. The UK, Ireland, Australia, USA, they don't give their figures in terms of admissions, but in terms of box office income. And here there's a double effect. Obviously, if you talk about income, if you calculate only in dollars, you have the exchange effect. Local currencies need to be compared without the exchange effect. On the first slide, everything was in dollars. Second point, it goes without saying that these data are very sensitive in terms of pricing and general inflation. So this leads to a double whammer, so to speak. You can see that the UK and above all Australia, compared with preceding years, have recovered nicely in 2021. They are faring well compared with 2019 and the 2015-2019 period. Once again, we're talking about box office. Australia is special because it's not a very dynamic market in 2015-2019. That may explain why they had less to catch up on than in other countries where the market is more dynamic. The recovery in the US is definite. There have been lots of blockbusters on the screen, yet much progress needs further to be made. In France and in Germany, we're doing quite well. Now let's look elsewhere too. I'm not going to go into too many details. There are some interesting countries in terms of admissions. A nice recovery in Mexico with plus 90%, but it's lagging behind the preceding years. It's a very dynamic market indeed. South Korea is interesting. It's a market which is quite similar to the French market. 200 million admissions prior to the crisis, and it's recovered nicely in 2022 compared with 2021, but it's still minus 50%. Compared to the pre-pandemic phase. A lot of work remains to be done. And then we have the sick child, China, which is finding it very difficult to recover. 2022 is a difficult year. It's lagging behind. The growth is really flagging. There were 10 days of euphoria. They beat records with some films which were released 1 or 2 years later than expected, and for 3 weeks the admissions and box office were at record levels. France, as you can see, and Germany are two countries which are managing quite well. They're a bit more robust when it comes to recovery compared with the big markets. Now, France and Germany share something else. These are two countries, they're the only two countries where there's a precise definition for art house cinema. There are other countries, I talked about Mexico, there you have art house, but there's no well-organized definition for art house theaters, contrary to France and Germany. Art house films, indies, travel around the world, but in France and Germany, this notion is well defined. So I'd like to focus on this sector. There are two profiles, two different histories here. In Germany, the art house theaters are a bit behind the rest of the world. They're recovering less well than the remainder of the market. Look at 2022 compared with 2021, 84%. For art house theaters, 87% for the whole of the market. And if you compare with 2019, art house is minus 36, whereas the global market is minus 33. So art house is having difficulty recovering. Conversely, in France, the recovery has been more robust in the art house theater sector. Here we stand at 87% recovery compared with 84% for the rest of the market. And we stand at minus 22 compared with 2019, whereas the global market for France is minus 29. So when it comes to art house theaters, the recovery in France is stronger and more encouraging. This is due to one thing. I talked about a Spanish film to explain the results in Spain in 2021. In France, as you'll see, if you look at the films, the art house films, you can clearly see that there are a huge number of French films in the top 10 of art house films so far in 2022. In the prior years, you have the annual top 10. The leading art house film so far is Encore, 1.4 million admissions nearly. That's more than the film number 1 in 2018. 2019 was an exceptional year. All the top 10 films had more than 1 million admissions. So 2019 was an exceptional year. 2022, there are very nice successes. You have films like L'Innocent, La Conspiration du Caire, which still have a potential up until the end of the year. So there's still potential that remains. It's difficult, however, to reach a certain level, to go beyond 800,000 and get up to 1 million admissions. There are 4 films above 1 million in 2018, and there's only 1 in 2022. or 2021 rather. So it's hard to balance things out. The recovery is solid. A lot of work remains to be done, but one shouldn't despair, particularly since the last few weeks. In September and October, there's been lots of good news. You have the success of a very diverse film range of art house films. So I will try to be brief. The global market is recovering slowly, and art house markets seem to be stronger in the European countries, particularly in France and Germany. In the UK also for other reasons. What one can say is that this year the blockbusters are back. One can expect them to be back for several years now, given the recent declaration of American studios. There'll be a number of American blockbusters back, and they're a driving force behind the market. Another driving force, which had collapsed a bit at the beginning of the year, is local content. Things are faring better since October, and this is key if the market to be healthy and dynamic. These are driving forces that really have to work well. In France and also throughout these areas, when there's a recovery, the recovery is often due to events and releases. I'm talking about films which are real events on their own scale. And we're talking about original stories, new stories compared with what we're used to. So I wish you a very good conference, and I hope we'll now go into the mechanisms of the French market in greater detail and the spectatorship. Thank you. Do you want to react to what's just been said? This conference can be followed on YouTube, the Europa Cinema YouTube channel too. What strikes you in terms of what Eric has just said? How did it inspire you?
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everybody. We really had a feeling on the production side. Well, we're a bit upstream, of course, of films. We don't have a very global vision of things, really. We all have the feeling amongst producers of independent films that things are faring better in France than elsewhere in the world. I thought things were even better than in other countries. I'm a bit surprised to see we're not doing that much better than other countries where it's a real disaster. Given what Eric has said, given the large number of independent films in France, we produce about 300 films a year in France, and a lot are minority co-productions. Things haven't stopped in that respect. In France, we continue to produce films thanks to measures taken by the CNC, insurance schemes, and even during the pandemic. Apart from the beginning, from March to June 2020, we continued to produce films. So there were lots and lots of films which were produced and were ready for when the theaters opened again. That explains why there's a bigger offering at the time. And we seem to be faring better, therefore, than others. I was also struck by the last slide, which compared the box office results. Even if the market is at -30, the number of admissions per film is a bit alarming compared with 2 years ago. So we're still suffering as distributors. We're present in 4 countries, Italy and Spain. It's very complicated indeed. Germany, a bit less so, even if admissions aren't that good, but Germany is very different. You have a buoyant TV market for certain kinds of films. This makes it possible to reassure distributors as well. in France. The last slide, I felt, was quite alarming. Lionel, I'm a bit more optimistic. Good morning, everybody. What struck me in Eric's presentation was the differences he underscored at the end. And that should really help us in our collective thought process and the action of the CNC. I'd like to focus on 3 points. The need for the market to be pushed by blockbusters, really buoyant films, whatever the nationality. Sometimes you find admissions there similar to before the crisis. Second point, it's absolutely necessary to provide for a wide range of films, including art house films, so that they can find their place on the market. Because we saw that art house films fared better, perhaps, in terms of audience, in terms of admissions. Also, it's absolutely necessary to support the release of films, to organize activities around the projections. That's special in terms of art house theaters. That's why they withstood the crisis better. We'll probably go back to this aspect a bit later on. Eric described in quantitative terms the French market. Now we're going to look at who are the people going to watch films. Sylvain BÉTHENOD is CEO of Vertigo Marketing Research France. Good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased indeed to take the floor after Eric and to talk about this market analysis. I'll try and round off what he said about trends in admissions. Perhaps I'll give you a more marketing vision of things. Who are behind these admissions? What's evolved and what hasn't? What's changed and what hasn't? Since 2016, which is the year when we launched our study called CINExpert, this is a survey, it's a weekly one, on the profile of cinema spectators in France. The study has been done in Italy too, and we'll be doing it in Belgium. We've noted that the cinema market is held up by 2 generations with behaviors that are very different. They're very different cultural practices. Recreational activities are different. Yet these 2 segments have been really the driving force behind the market. We're talking about the 15 to 24-year-olds and the 60-plus-year-olds. The specificities of the French market hinge on the fact that you have a very heterogeneous offer or supply. You have a lot of art house films and more popular films too, more mainstream films. And because you have this wide supply, you can bring together these 2 age groups. You can bring them together in the theater lobbies. However, one can see that their paths diverge often at the time when they choose a film. These 2 generations, the 15 to 24 and plus 60s, they are the driving force behind the market, but their paths diverge because they go and watch totally different films in most cases. So this complementarity is a real strength on the French market compared with other European markets. But this complementarity in terms of a more mainstream offering and a more independent offering, which reaches 2 different targets, well, this does comprise more long-term dangers, as we shall see later on. There are a lot of figures, a lot of curves here, a lot of colors. In fact, this is a survey we do every week. Why? Do we look at audience profiles and admissions every week? The cinema market is based on supply, largely, the supply of films. It's really important, therefore, every week to understand who goes to the cinema and to try to link the programming with a given profile or behavior of the public. If you look at the weekly market, you have the volume of global admissions. You can see this through data provided by Comscore and others. Peak admissions take place when there are very popular films that are released. We note the same thing, however, when it comes to the various age groups. Here you can see that you have the older age group. That's the red curve. The dark blue curve is that for 15 to 24-year-olds. You can note that these two age groups are driving forces behind admissions in France, conversely to other markets, where granted there are driving forces, the 15 to 24-year-olds who go to see more often than not American films, often very popular films. The complementarity, the strength of the French market hinges on this red line, where you have a large number of admissions as of the age of 60 or more. And you can see that this peaks, particularly when you have strong offerings of French films, popular films, mainstream films, or more independent films, which address the less popular topics. So this is very interesting. It's interesting to note that every week since the beginning of the year, this is what we noted before the health crisis, these two target groups are often in the lead. What's noteworthy, particularly for the blue curve, which represents the 15 to 24-year-olds, you can see that admissions are high when American blockbusters are released, at least in 2022. In 2019 and 2018, certain French films managed to push up the admissions amongst this age group. It's also interesting to note that these 15 to 24-year-olds represent a very small segment of the French population. You have 12 million 15 to 24-year-olds in France. That's a small proportion of the French population. Yet, this small percentage accounts for a large number of admissions. That's really interesting to note. Conversely, the over 60s, that's a big population. They're often targeted by French film distributors, art house film distributors. This group has been accustomed to going to the cinema for a long time now. And this age group in volume is a lot, 20 million people, nearly 20% of the French population. I know, not 20%, but 30% of the French population. So because of the volume effect, when you manage to reach out to this group, it has a huge impact on admissions. So this is the structure. We're not talking about volume, but the structure of admissions in 2022 up to the end of November. Here you have the structure, the cinema audience profile. The over 60s we were talking about earlier on, that's 1 out of 4 admissions. And the 15 to 24, that's 1 out of 5. So nearly 50% of admissions concern these two different age groups. Now, if you go into greater detail, you can look at who is going to see French films. In the broad sense of the word, I'm talking about art house films and mainstream films. The over 60s represent a much bigger percentage in terms of admissions. About 38% of admissions two French films concern the over 60s. The younger group represents hardly 14%. So you can see that these French films are watched by an older population. This is the opposite of American films, which attract a lot of the under 25s, 40%, 45%. And here we put together all the American films. We could, of course, zoom on superhero films, which attract between 60 to 65% of the under 25s. Here you can see the great complementarity of the offering. The offering reaches out to an older population, and the offering also addresses a younger population. This is what we call mapping in marketing. These little bubbles on an axis. This is a 3D view. You have two axes. You have the axis which is horizontal, and then you have the vertical axis, and then you have the bubbles. The bubbles are the films. The bigger the bubble, the more the admissions. When you have a bubble located in the west, on the left, then you can consider that the film attracted a younger population. The more the bubble is located on the east, that is on the right, the more it means the public is comprised of people over 35 or 50. What one can quickly see, you have the top 100 French films in 2022 plotted on this graph, and the large majority of French films are positioned to target the older population above the age of 35. You have Simone and Novembre. There, the target is an older population. Some target a younger population, but the main trends in these films is that they attract a slightly older audience. Things are fairly complex, of course. You have a large number of French films, mainstream films, independent French films. There are a large number every week. Every week, there's a bit of a fight for the targets. A lot of films target the same core audience, so admissions will be fragmented and split between a large number of films. That means that each film has fewer admissions because there's so much competition between the films. Here you have the French films. And let's compare with American films. Here you have the positioning of American films. It's a bit like a Lego. They sort of slot in where there's a bit of place, a bit of space for the younger audiences who like these films. One can readily understand how complementary things are, and you have this impact on the number of admissions. These American films round off the admissions for French films. When a French film accounts for 40 or 45% of market share in France, imagine the volume in terms of admissions amongst the older audiences. And if you add admissions to go and see American films, you can see the numbers are quite big, really quite huge. And in France, here you have the films. One can do the same thing with the Italian market. We do this weekly analysis with our colleagues, Algo Research in Italy. And in Italy, the bubbles are smaller. Films achieve fewer admissions than in France. But what's interesting to note is that on the right-hand side of the graph, you have often national films, art house films, and their share is very small. On the left, things are more similar to what you see with American films. So all the films on the left in Italy, most of them are actually American blockbusters. On the right, you have a lot of national films because the thick bubbles are national films, be it in France or in Italy. And you can see that there's a bit of a shortfall in that respect in Italy. In Belgium, this is a survey between May and November, same methodology as in France. We'll be doing this study again in January. What's interesting to note is the share between May and December 2019 of the over 50s. In France, we stand at about 40%. That didn't change so much in 2022. In Belgium, we stand at 22%. And the share of young people in the Belgian audiences is bigger than in France. There aren't more admissions. It just means that the young people account for a greater proportion of the admissions. To finish, and by way of conclusion, let's look at what has happened since the beginning of 2022 compared with the time before the crisis. On the left, you have admissions, average admissions per target group between 2016 and 2019. We did an estimation to take account of November. We end up with minus 28 or 29% admissions compared with the same period in 2016 to 19 on average. The fall is 29%. This drop, and that harks back to what Eric was saying earlier on. The national offering, the offering of independent films was quite large in 2022, and hence the 60s and overs had lots of films which targeted that age group. So the percentage drop is lower than with other target groups. The 60-plus target group accounts for perhaps fewer admissions, but that's only a 23% drop. Hence, it's a smaller drop than for the other target groups. What you can see, however, is that there are targets we never talk about in terms of the cinema. The intermediate groups, the 25 to 59s or 35 to 59-year-olds. There, the admissions are higher than the average. You can also see this in terms of structure. Look how things have evolved since 2016. Here you have in purple that the share is dropping. This is not linked to the crisis. It's been a constant trend since 2016. The crisis just amplified the phenomenon. In 2016, we stood at 30% of the 25 to 49-year-olds. Now it's only 25 to 26%. It's a complicated target, in fact, to analyze, but it's an important one when it comes to admissions. We're talking about a large number of people. And above all, these are future spectators. Potentially, this is the future target for art house films. This is the future target for independent films. And this is a target which today tends to go less to the cinema. In the short term, it doesn't really matter. They're not that numerous. This is offset by the older population that goes to the cinema a lot. But in the long term, this is a bit more problematical. As we can see today, this target increasingly is watching American films, American blockbusters, and their behavior is closer to the 15 to 24-year-olds than the over 60s. So we saw this with Top Gun, and increasingly, Black Panther, you can see this intermediate group tends to see more blockbusters, and this trend is becoming more pronounced. So that's a short summary of the situation. Thank you, Sylvain, for this very enlightening presentation. Are there things that really struck you? Are there certain preconceived ideas we may have that seem to be contradicted here? Ever since the movie theaters opened again, people say the older population goes to the cinema less. It's not true. This is what we noted. The elder population has gone back to watch films right after COVID. The admissions rebounded, and the target group was going to the cinema again quite a lot. In terms of the different age groups, occasional moviegoers are often in this target group. But the occasional moviegoers have dropped in terms of admissions, and that's worrying. There's a structural change in audiences or in target groups and populations. And that particular target group has become more selective. This age group tends to stay at home and watch films using streaming. I have two reactions. First of all, you can see the glass half full. If you compare France and Italy, I have noted that it's the diversity of the offering in France which accounts for the strength of the French market, and I think we have to bear this in mind. For the CNC, and in terms of regulatory entities and our support mechanisms, the diversity of the offering stands out here, and we have to bear this in mind. It has to be retained as a very important goal. Second point, yes, in terms of what you've just said and what was underscored, two challenges, two concerns. The first is the 25 to 50-year-old market. We saw in your survey presented in Cannes at the request of the CNC, we saw that this is the target group which is most price sensitive, and I think we have to give thought to this as a group. You also have this split in terms of taste. The 25 to 50-year-olds are keen on French films, also the younger group. So we have to help this population, the 15 to 50s, to rediscover the joy of seeing French films and art house films. Even if we know this intuitively, we sort of wonder what kind of film we should produce. We know full well that if we produce for the 25 to 50s, it'll be a marginal film compared with American films or real mainstream films. I think the 15 to 25-year-olds tend to go to the cinema in groups. It's the least costly form of entertainment when it comes to culture. So they go in groups. I don't know whether you've seen this. The CNC and the Federation of Exhibitors have made a small film, which we've all seen. The idea is to encourage people to go to the cinema. They said this, it's not me. Go to the cinema to meet, to flirt. So it's really for the 15 to 25s. They go as a group to flirt and have a good time. That's good. They go as a group. That means more admissions. The older population, well, they're just two often, or maybe with just another couple. Instead of going to play cards, they go to see a film, say. But it's a bit worrying to see this. You have this intermediate age group. Families don't go to the film, or they go to see a Christmas film. They go once a year. One might say, oh, well, families, that's really good. You have the children, the grandparents, and that means a lot of admissions. I'm trying to think in terms of aggregate numbers. So families aren't going to the cinema, and young parents with children don't either. So as a producer, you need to wonder why. We try to work on the cinema and audiovisual programs. A lot of people stay at home just to watch series and to use the social networks. What's really striking with this graph is to see how the French offering doesn't do much for the under 25s, who only go to see American films, really. We're not producing, or we produce very few films that target that age group. That's really quite striking. As Marie was saying, it's hard to compare with the American cinema, but we seem to be neglecting this target group. It's more complicated to finance this kind of film. Well, you have genre films, but the budgets tend to be smaller. When it comes to major films for that age group, it's infinitesimal in France. Before the pandemic, there were some great successes amongst the 15 to 25-year-olds. There was comedies which did very well. Les Misérables, for example, attracted a large number of 15 to 24-year-olds. Some films manage it. Simone as well. There were 40% 15 to 24-year-olds, 15% 15 to 24-year-olds. That's quite good. Perhaps it's a question of promotion, publicity. We did some tests with a certain number of films. We studied people's views when they finished watching often art house films. We asked the spectators to grade the film, and the best grades were given by the younger group. When young people are in the movie theater, they may be convinced by the film, appreciate it. You have to get them to go to see the film. That's what's at stake. In terms of comparison, it's interesting to see how target groups are evolving. We don't have all that much hindsight. What about 15 years ago? The 15 to 24-year-olds, the 25 to 50-year-olds, were the percentages the same in terms of admissions? At a given age, you have less time to go to see a film, you have young children, you tend to go back to the cinema later on. You express certain concerns with this target group, which seems to be dwindling. But perhaps later on in life, they'll go back to the cinema. I don't know. Well, the 25 to 59 age group, you have to be used to go to see films to recover and resume this activity later on in life. I remember talking with directors in distribution, directors of various studios. They used to say that a large percentage of the audience doesn't choose the film before going to the cinema. In other words, they just go to the cinema and they choose which film in front of the cinema. Now, this is a kind of behavior that has totally disappeared, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, it's less pronounced because you have so much information on films. In fact, the danger is that we end up reaching out to the same people all the time. How can we broaden the audience? Eric talked about this earlier on. We can't seem to move beyond a given threshold in admissions. We'll know about this soon. We'll have a new wave, a new CNC study in January, and we'll know which percentage of people go to the cinema still. How many people have we lost? We don't yet know. The danger is that we have this micro-market which is over-informed and which knows exactly what it wants to go and see. So there's no room for spontaneity anymore. People don't just go out and then decide to choose which film to see. Eric? I might nuance things a bit. Sorry to interrupt. Unless I'm mistaken, still today, the majority of spectators who go to movies, most of them go to the same movie theater every time. Yes, that's true. A lot of people go to the same movie theater each time. Eric? Could you switch on your microphone? I just wanted to spell out one thing in terms of age groups and the structure of the offering. I'd like to say that 2 years ago, American production really predominated, particularly animated films. And then you have Japanese animated films, which are doing ever better. And these films address the under 25s. There's a second point. Genre films, scary films. We used to be masters in this area. The Americans have always been there, and they occupy the field. And these are the genres that work best in the world, particularly for those under the age of 25, and they are real drivers. This is something the CNC is encouraging. Now, I think there are 3 films of that type. Thank you very much, Sylvain, for all these explanations and for all this information. Thank you to Eric.
Sur l'échange, alors même si c'est pas autant qu'on pouvait le penser, on voit quand même que la France a globalement mieux résisté. Alors, est-ce que c'est dû à quoi? Enfin, à quoi est-ce que c'est dû? C'est mieux dans cet ordre-là. Est-ce que c'est déjà le soutien, enfin tout le système, tout le mécanisme français qui a permis aussi de soutenir ça? Est-ce que c'est le soutien de l'État? Est-ce que c'est une forme de fidélité du public français? Vous l'attribuez à quoi cette meilleure santé totalement relative, hein,
Je me lance. Oui, j'ose espérer que le massif soutien public, 300 millions d'euros pour l'ensemble des maillons de la chaîne, donc accordé par le CNC tout au long de la crise sanitaire. J'ose espérer que ce soutien public a eu effectivement les effets que l'on voit sur la résilience, la résistance de la fréquentation en France. Je suis d'autant plus convaincu du rôle important qu'ont pu jouer ces soutiens.
I am quite convinced that we have supported very heavily all kinds of professionals, and we have the public, the French public system has backed heavily all kinds of professionals, and this has a positive influence on the number of French film goers. So the consequence of all this is that various professionals continue to invest, and we have succeeded in continuing our work. And we have succeeded in the fact that we have not had bankruptcies during the epidemics. There is a heavy public support, and there is also, luckily enough, a strong financial system in France with strong regulations. For instance, If I must take one example only, the budget of CNC during the crisis and for the coming years will remain on a constant level despite difficulties. French professionals know the system quite well, but how does the French system work? Could you please explain how it works to everyone in the hall? Well, the key of the French system is that it is distributing finances to various professionals. The budget of cinema, the income of cinemas, of films in theaters, on televisions, on VOD, etc. The whole budget is taxed for about 700 million euros. And the 700 million euros are redistributed to professionals. This is the key to this French system. There is also a certain obligation for television channels to finance the production of films. And there is, furthermore, various SOFICAs, there is various subsidies by origins of France. So the whole of this list contributes to the promotion of French cinema. And there is also discussions on Windows. Streamers have been integrated in the whole system, and things have been improved lately. You are right. There's always been negotiations in France, and the purpose of which is to promote French cinema and the audiovisual production. Claude Eric mentioned the number of admissions in the 90s, and we have less admissions today because of paid TVs, cable TV, VODs, and the like. So we do continue with platforms to integrate in the system new commerce with new ways of broadcasting works. So, Marie and Cécile, what is the situation of the French production, financially speaking, for instance? And when I see the volume of French films being produced, isn't there a paradox here? I just wanted to mention one thing. Why were we able to resist in France better than in other countries as far as the number of admissions is concerned? Because we were at 200 million admissions in 2010, for instance, which was already quite high compared to other European countries. I think that in 2019 we were at 213 million admissions, which is very high. People took on the habit of going to a cinema, and they couldn't go there during the epidemics. So people have to slowly come back to the same level of admissions. I think this year will be around 160 million. Well, 150, 160 million admissions, roughly. I remember being the chairwoman of a union of producers in favor of independent production. Those who are the 40 lobbyists who keep discussing on obligations of platforms and TV channels and windows and the like. In February, we had an agreement on windows, and we still have to negotiate again to change the windows and the calendar. So we keep discussing all the time between us, and this promotes French cinema production and the world production also, because international distributors and producers, from France, finance about half of independent cinema in the world. There's always a French professional financing the production of a film somewhere in the world. So we have, between producers and distributors and exhibitors, we keep grumbling against public bodies such as CNC, for instance. But yet, we must admit that we've been really backed up, especially during the last 3 years. We were able to continue producing films because we had an insurance system, because the risk of epidemics was not taken into account by traditional insurance companies. If we had a problem on a film, on the shooting of a film, and the shooting could not continue, then that was a risk. And thanks to CNC, we were able to continue to produce films. Also thanks to new insurance schemes, including epidemics risk. We have a lot of imagination in France, especially due to this cooperation between the public bodies and the private companies. And that's about 40 people who keep discussing between themselves and who try to impose new obligations to new actors or newcomers who present films to spectators on new platforms, for instance. And we all decided to cooperate in order to foster very strict cooperation and very strict obligations to newcomers. If we compare France and other countries, we must conclude that in other countries, other than France, the obligations for streamers were at about 5% or sometimes 1% of the turnover. And in France, we said it's a minimum of 20%. You can imagine how the boss of Netflix reacted when he heard this. He was not very happy. So, for about 2 years, we did negotiate with this SMAD decision to impose concrete obligations to Netflix, for instance, and others. So why do we produce? Simply because we have money, and this money is still there. We haven't lost it. And to conclude, we have imposed new obligations of pre-financing for foreign streamers in favor of independent production. And for us producers, we imposed the fact that we would keep the rights. And we also fostered the basic financing schemes that we had always had in France. by television channels, for instance. So we have a little more money. We have an extremely fantastic, great number of theaters in France. We have had no theater closing down. We have new theaters opening up. And we have the possibility of working together and producing films and distributing and showing films. Now, the point is to find out for which public we are working. If we do not work much on the segment on the 30, 50 years old, we see that there is a certain number of films for this public of the 30, 50-year-olds, and if it doesn't work any longer, we'll have a problem at midterm. The public for theaters will have a tendency to disappear, and this is the great question that we have to find an answer to. To complete what Mary said, I would be a little bit more pessimistic than you are on distribution. Financing schemes are being revised today. No distributor, except a few studios, for instance, continues thinking as prior to the epidemics. At Wild Bunch, for instance, we do not judge films as we used to. When we check films on an Excel spreadsheet, well, we see that the number of admission has been divided by 2 compared to 3 years ago. So at a certain point, this will have consequences on distribution and on budgets. There are positive effects on new obligations and the new windows on a certain type of films. I see that there is a strong position of TV channels and pay TVs and platforms, which are all being more and more powerful. If we can do this, fine, but we have to reduce the risk of distribution. We have the same cost as we used to for distribution, and the number of admissions has been halved. So we don't have to be a great mathematician to understand that we have a problem here. And so distribution is a bit the weak point of this chain. What can the CNC do to help distribution? We have other revenue schemes, and this has had an impact on production. When you are a producer, you go and see a television channel and you say, I don't have a distributor, then you'll have to go and back to that TV channel once you have one. So how can we continue invest as we used to in the past? In 2021, we have seen the numbers that we have reached. So what can we do? The CNC can continue to support the CNC, the distribution, and we have the will to continue on the same level of financial support. And we have to work aiming at the public of the 25, 50-year-olds, and work also on the 15, 25-year-olds for them to appreciate a wider range of films. I feel that this is the work of exhibitors, and this is also what we should do to accompany films when they are being screened in theaters. We also have a certain number of mediators in certain theaters, especially arts theaters. The CNC and local companies should multiply the number of mediators. When there is a mediator in a screening, there are many spectators, and in order to improve our presence in the mind of the young people, we have to work more with social networks, and we have to improve our mastery over data. In France, we are a bit late in this respect, and I believe that this is absolutely key to the development of our professions, especially for 15 and 25-year-olds. When we prepared this roundtable, Mary, you said that we have a certain number of obligations imposed to streamers. And there's another problem. It is difficult to find talents or technicians today. This is true. It seems to be a paradox. However, I'm not optimistic. I know that today things are going well. The problem is that we have to lend at a certain point. And cinema being produced by producers and sold elsewhere has difficulties for several reasons, as we've heard this morning. If we lose 50% of a public, well, that will obviously lead to a worse situation. This is the distributors have difficulties today because of the number of admissions that is falling. They don't get their usual results, and they invest less on future films, especially for those who have produced films. I produce films, art films, let's say, and I get less backing from public bodies, from CNC, for instance, to finance future films. So people have to go back to theaters, otherwise we'll be in difficult situations in the future. Exhibitors also have their role to play, and we have to produce cinema, film for theaters, but also audiovisual works. In France, until recently, we had the producers for films, for theaters, who were types of Brahmins, for instance. They were on top of the world. And also we had the other type of producers who were the peasants in this business, and so to speak, those who were working as an industry may work, for instance. So I've always worked in both sides. I was a Brahman for some films and a peasant for other films. And so we have the Misérables, for instance, and November, and everyone has his scheme, his project. Audiovisual works today have improved recently because Disney or Apple have very high budgets today, and this is the reason why I believe that we have access for audiovisual work to very famous actors who used to work for the films for theaters, better technicians. So this is also a problem for theaters because there is more money to produce series, ambitious series with a budget of 4 million euros or more. And money goes towards the audiovisual production rather than to films. Furthermore, there are a certain number of obligations with 200 or 300 million more to produce in France that will potentially go to technicians and scriptwriters and technicians. And so we have a very down-to-earth problem, that is that we don't have enough professionals for all this. You were mentioning technicians and talents. We are distributors and producers. And every day, when I started to work on that Wild Bunch on September the 1st, I had 2 producers who had lost 1 actor about a month before shooting, and there was a big panic, and 1 partner for distribution had dropped down also. And we have producers with this type of problem. You have a contract with an actor, for instance, or a talent, and if there is a big series that starts in between, before shooting, well, they leave your project and they just go somewhere else. Not too nice. A reaction for the lack of technicians. The answer of the French government would be the project entitled France 2030. Which aims at boosting the economy in France, the economy at large, including a new generation of nuclear plants, new developments in transportation, several billion euros investments, and also the cinema and the audiovisual industry. And 2 goals here: development of schools to train technicians and talents for tomorrow everywhere in France. And also, the second aim would be the development of studios of all types everywhere in France. 300 million euros will be dedicated to this type of projects, of new schools and new studios for shooting that will be launched in coming years. We're speaking about technicians, but also to managers of production. We don't have many such professionals. There is a mic in the room if you want to ask questions.
Bonjour, moi je suis donc exploitant à Privas en Ardèche.
I am in Privas, in the Ardèche area in France. You raised various points in the first half that were quite optimistic. And then in the second half of your debate, you raised other points which I believe more in. We have projects that are less ambitious today. There is more and more importance in our trade for platforms, for French films, for American films, international films, and the are more and more going in the direction of platforms. This is my feeling. I don't have statistics here, just a feeling that I have. I feel that we believe less into films for theaters, be it the public, producers, various professionals. It seems that nobody believes any longer into films for theaters. It's a bit bleak. I don't know what you feel about this.
Well, it's not up to me to answer. I don't have the impression that I have a hangover. It's not like the day after a big party. If you look at the art house films, the top ones in 2022, I don't think the offer is collapsing. I don't share your feeling in any way. There are some wonderful things happening. The public hasn't yet come back. But I think there was a study in Italy, according to which 2023 will remain complicated, but 2024, bingo. And so I'm looking at 2024. You have many ambitious projects. The offer is there. I show a lot of art house films. Personally speaking, I find it's wonderful. So the supply is there. I'm talking about the ambition of the projects. The money being invested, there's just less. There seems to be less motivation. That's what I see personally from my position as an exhibitor. You're talking about ambition. Do you mean in terms of budget or the sort of show? It's in terms of budget, not in terms of quality, because the quality is there. I can see it. You have lots of quality films. I'm talking about ambition. Ambition in terms of the budgets invested, and that's very important. Thank you. Any other questions? I would like to answer. In terms of the budget invested, you saw the various declarations by Jérôme Sédou. The goal is to make very ambitious films, financially speaking, to invest a lot. You have the episodes of The Three Musketeers. There are 2 films financed by PATRY, 30 million per film. The real issue, though, as a producer, is, of course, the ratio of the cost of the film, the budget invested, and then final admissions. Last year, we had the wonderful film, Giannoli, by Giannoli. The Lost Illusions, 18 millions with just $1 million in box office. Then you have Valérie Lemercier's film as well, on the singer, Aline. The ambition is there. In these 2 films, you have a clear ambition, and people went to see them, but not enough. Jérôme Sédou has this really strong ambition with the various producers, because he co-produces, in fact. And the idea is that next year there will be some very costly, very ambitious films, and we'll see at the end of the year if he was right or wrong. I produced films that didn't have a lot of admissions, but they remained profitable. That's the key issue. You don't want to lose money producing the films you produce. We produce very ambitious films, okay, but you need at least 2 million admissions. And that's quite complicated at present. Thank you.
Thank you. From Germany. You said a lot about the French market. It was very interesting, although you didn't say very much about the very young cinema goers, so to speak to children. How's the development in France there?
Sur the animated film?
No. You talked about cinema goers from 15 years above. So what's the development with the children's films? All the time.
alors, en tout cas,
well, at Wild Bunch, children's films, family films, animated films, because when you talk about children's films, you often talk about an animated film. This is a genre that we believe in. We've always invested and continue to do so. Where I used to work, we always bought or invested in animated, ambitious animated films. So these are films that do attract big audiences. These are films that create a habit and a behavior, and people grow accustomed, people grow accustomed to going to the cinema. And so, indeed, this is a market segment that we focus on. We're going to come out with La Guerre des Loulous. This will be the biggest release of Wild Bunch in January, and it's designed for the whole family, and in particular for very young people. It's not an animated film. So we're continuing to do this. Family films entail a lot of editorial costs, but certainly, we continue to focus on this market segment. Last question, and then we'll draw some conclusions. One last question, maybe? Well, I have one. In France, we've observed a phenomenon of concentration of production. You have aggregators who buy studios. I know that MARTI has talked about it. You are very mistrustful about this trend. What do you think about this trend? Well, fortunately, in France, we still have a broad range of players in terms of production, distribution, and exhibition. So for me, the diversity of size in terms of the players provides for this great diversity in the offering to address the biggest, widest audience possible. I understand what you're referring to. This trend does exist, but still the French market is based on a wide number of players. For me, what does this lead me to think? What sized actors are necessary? What size of players are needed to grow the offering for the new distribution channels like platforms? Is this absolutely necessary or not, in fact, to have this? That's my question. Well, thank you to you all, and thank you to Eric and Sylvain for attending this roundtable this morning. Now we'll move on to the next roundtable. And thank you very much indeed to the participants.
Jeu de l'autre, tout va bien. Merci.
Jean.
Pas la peine de les allumer maintenant parce que ça va pas faire. C'est deux, si jamais.
Tu mets sur les sièges, sur la table.
C'est la chaîne 2.
Je pense pas. Bonjour, Jérémie.
Voilà. Voilà, tout le monde est donc.
So everyone's here. Thank you. We're going to continue this morning in the flesh and blood, and others will be following on YouTube. We're now going to look at the future. Please welcome our guests. I'll start with Ariane Toscan du Bantier, Head of Communication and Heritage Cinema Gaumont France, Richard PATRY, Exhibitor and President of the French Cinema Association, and Jérémie KESSLER, Head of European and International Policy Unit CNC France, Johan Ubermühlen, Territory Manager for Austria, Germany, Uni France, and plus the UK and Australia. You have microphones, and we have Marguerite Itier. Marguerite Itier, Head of Media and Cinema, French Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs. So welcome to you all, and thank you for being with us this morning. You may have seen Eric and Sylvain BÉTHENOD's surveys. You may have attended the preceding panel. How do you view the future of admissions and audiences? Claude Eric at the beginning recalled that in 1992 we stood at 116 million euros. And I'm sure we were saying similar things at the time. That's the end. We'll never manage to survive. And then in 2010, box office was 200 million euros. How do you view admissions in the future? Thank you for welcoming me here. Well, I'm a bit like LIONEL BERTINET. I don't feel that I've got a real hangover. I'm extremely optimistic, in other words, when it comes to the future. Not because you have to be optimistic. I do indulge in positive thinking, of course. We have to see what we've just gone through. And this, of course, isn't the end either in terms of the movie theaters. We're just emerging from the pandemic. And then right after that, there's been a major crisis for us, which is the energy crisis. You know, the cinema is the art of light. You have to light up the screens. Cinema is like a bakery in France. And, of course, a baguette is part of universal heritage. The cinema is the same. They need a lot of light. They need a lot of electricity. And at present, we have to realize that the operating expenses, the running expenses, are attaining a huge proportion. I'm trying to get rid of the negative sides of things right away. The cost of energy for cinema is 5 to 10% of turnover so far, and according to our projections for 2023, this will rise to over 23%. Just imagine what this represents. So we're still in a crisis. We'll have to get through it. But my colleagues are in good spirits because we have survived the first crisis, and we have noted a certain number of things. All the figures you showed bear this out. France is the country, objectively speaking, which is the most resilient in the world. We're always indulged in self-flagellation in France. We compare with 2010, which was second best year. The goal is to rise above 200 million. You shouldn't always try to aim at 2019. Now I'm turning to Eric. In France, we talk about admissions, not turnover. In all the other countries, people talk about turnover. So there's no inflation when it comes to admissions. Whereas with box office, there really is. So the figures we can see show that France stands at minus 29% at present, minus 29% compared with 2019, which is the best record year over the past few decades. Things are evolving like elsewhere in the world. So we're indulging in self-flagellation. So there's the third thing we've seen, as you all showed with your figures. Look at the complementarity of our offering. We have wonderful producers in this country who are making films in all different areas. The big blockbusters. We'll have some released in the next few weeks. They're French blockbusters. They're intermediate films. The films in the middle, which account for quite a lot of admissions too. Look at the quality. Look at the quality we can propose to spectators now. Novembre, Simone, encore Cédric Kaplich. This is a real jewel, but it's not a hugely accessible film. Yet we have more than 1.5 million people who've gone to see it. So, frankly, on the French market, you have all these films, plus the American films, which we absolutely need. Our problem today consists in having an offering for all publics, and they'll all act as engines, as motors for growth, all these different segments. That's what accounts for our strong market in France. Let's be a bit chauvinistic. We have the most beautiful set of movie theaters perhaps in the world. There's support from the government. None of the movie theaters have gone broke so far. We must continue this. That's why the Federation I represent is currently fighting over the issue of the energy crisis, because we have to pursue this battle to maintain all the movie theaters. So we have the films, we have the movie theaters, and then we have the spectators, who aren't just statistics. We're talking about people who love the cinema, who go to see movies. And when you offer things, when you editorialize things, then despite everything, people go to see, be it blockbusters, very small films. There's a film which was released called Arrête les mensonges. It's a small French film, and it's a pleasure to see it going all around the movie theaters in France. You have a director and an actor who come at the beginning of the screening, and you'll get the audience. And this is wonderful work that we exhibitors can do in terms of editorialization, defending the films, organizing activities around the films, and the spectators will come, because there's nothing more magical than to go and see a film in a movie theater. There's nothing more pleasurable. There's nothing more addictive. And when you go back, you are obviously going to want to see even more films afterwards. So the crisis isn't over. The crisis, the health crisis is over, but now we're going through another crisis, a major one, which has an impact on our citizens, fellow citizens' purchasing power. When you have less to spend, you sacrifice the things which may not be essential for you. However, We have to do our work to ensure that spectators go back to the movie theater. And when we manage to propose good films and we organize activities around these films, the spectators are there. I'm not waiting for 2024. I think 2023 will be a year when we get near to 200 million. Here you have a microphone if you want to take the floor. Good morning, everybody. At the Fédération des Éditeurs de Films, the French Federation, we have members who are small distribution companies. Half our members are small independent entities. We have fairly big French entities, which are very well known and long-standing. And we also have American studios that belong to the Federation. So we have a vision of how everyone feels. We're quite groggy, in fact. We've gone through an unprecedented crisis. We distributors, exhibitors, there was a whole year without any income practically, and then there was a year with income biased by health restrictions. As you know, we're in a post-crisis situation, and the effects are still there. It takes a time to produce and show a film. We're still in a period of crisis. We're still suffering from its effects. But I do share Rachel's views. We remain optimistic. We can see that there's a robust link between French people and the cinema. When films manage to touch the public, people come back. We have lovely surprises. And the cinema has fared pretty well. We're confident in terms of durability. There is a change, of course, a mutation. You have the platforms and new offerings from historic free channels who are developing an offering, be they linear or other. And that changes the situation. But in terms of a cultural experience, it's always like a yo-yo system. The pleasure to switch off your mobile phone for an hour and a half and be in a movie theater, we believe in that strongly. Of course, our cash situation was dented in a major way, but we think that if spectators remain at home, there'll be lots of new things, but we're going to be offering them alternative forms of entertainment. So we have to also hold up in terms of the visibility of films. We need to work hand in hand with exhibitors. We need to ensure films are known, they are visible, they are attractive, they tell people it's worth leaving your sofa, worth leaving home to go and see a film in the movie theater. As we know, our role will be to explain this to the powers that be, too. Distributors will have a paramount role to play when it comes to the choice of films that they're going to choose and the dialogue they will have with producers, because they're involved upstreams in terms of minimum guarantees. And likewise, people will have to be able to invest in marketing and in communication, in promotion, in tools which are modern when it comes to promoting films, in order to be heard. One of our members said, well, sometimes you can't criticize people for not going to see a film they have never heard about. And we have to promote the films that we believe in for people to go and see them. As Richard was saying, next year there will be major films, American films, in large numbers. Same thing for French films. At the beginning of 2023, there will be films which will continue to be shown. Have you done any projections in terms of admissions for 2023? I think we can reach 200 million in 2023. I truly believe this. First of all, Avatar will also be screened in 2023. It will only have been screened for 2 weeks in 2022. We're more optimistic than you are in terms of 2022. We think we'll be at 160 in 2022. It'll be tough, but we can achieve this. We have a nice array of films. There are 2 slightly empty weeks now with the World Cup. That's clear. This is visible in the movie theaters because you can see how many TV viewers there are for the World Cup. So TV audiences are huge. The distributors anticipated this, and the programming is a bit weaker these 2 weeks. Of course, there are wonderful films being released, but they're not designed to really push the market for the whole of November. So you have the World Cup effect in November, because normally the World Cup is in June, and November is usually a month where you have more admissions than in June. But we think we'll reach between 155 and 160 million with the return of American blockbusters next year. It'll be exceptional. There are French blockbusters too. You said that earlier on. You have comedies, Alibi, Astérix. There are huge films. Alexandre Dumas, The Three Musketeers. That's the most famous French novel that's been adapted for the cinema. I'm sure you've all seen images. It really makes you want to go and see the film. Then you have intermediate films, middle road films, smaller ones, which account for diversity. As I said, you have to think positive, granted, but we truly believe that we can attain 200 million. What's good for 2023 is that there'll be films for all publics. We've seen the images in Deauville, in the Journée des Éditeurs we organized, and this boosted people's morale. There were some beautiful images of up-and-coming art house films, and 2023, in terms of offering, should enable us to reach out to all the audiences. We'll be able to hold them by the hand and try to resuscitate this reflex which leads them to the movie theater. We have this art house public. We hope they'll risk going to see less well-known films. There's a phenomenon developing here. As people go less to the cinema, they tend to take fewer risks. They say, well, maybe I'll go and see the last film of this very well-known distributor rather than a first low-budget film which by someone who's less well-known. So spectators are perhaps a bit more reluctant to take risks. And then there's another very small thing which will radically change the situation. Finally, we'll stop comparing with 2019. We'll compare 2023 with 2022. Every week we'll get good news. Therefore, every week we'll have good news, and we'll be able to say that people are going to the cinema. We have this bashing in September. All of a sudden, people were saying the cinemas are going to shut, they're going to close down, and then 2 weeks later, it was an historic week with the release of Black Panther. Oh, we're saved, everything is wonderful, people are going to the cinema again. As we'll stop comparing with 2019, we'll compare with 2022. All the theaters will have a good week. People will say the cinema is really dynamic, and that's capital for us. When you say to people that the cinema is modern, that people are going in large numbers, then in the collective subconscious, people want to go to the cinema as opposed to going to see something when the cinema is supposed to be dying in the month to come. Well, the French cinema abroad, since the release of some well-known films, well, since the reopening of movie theaters, what's up there? Thank you for this invitation. I'm optimistic personally. During the crisis, we stood at 14 million admissions in 2020, 17 million abroad. Now we stand at 25 million admissions. We could add 1 or 2 million between now and the end of the year. So we still stand at minus 45%, even if we can stand higher and taller. I'd also like to say that the French cinema is faring a bit less well on foreign markets than the global box office. Of course, there is a recovery. That's reassuring. People are going back to the cinema, particularly those who are accustomed to do so. But it's mainly the American cinema that's attracting people, and very local cinema. When it comes to viewership of French films abroad, we still have some way to go. People are saying, well, we're not doing too badly. If you look at the performance of the French cinema abroad, you have admissions, which has been largely discussed. You have also box office for exporters. You have the international co-production. We have the impression that we have avoided a disaster, that the recovery is there. Cash in 2021 was 380 million euros in terms of exports. These are figures which are record ones. They're even higher than 2019, so we're catching up. And it shows that the sector is on a healthy footing and can really get going again. So we have these positive signals. We are talking about distributors and exporters. We sense that there are structural changes underway, however. The French cinema abroad survives thanks to its huge diversity. With foreign distributors, one can sense that they need reassurance. They focus more on certain films which can sell in 30 or 40 countries, films which have been successful in international festivals, for example. They're going to focus on these films. They may be neglecting other segments of the French film industry, art house films, who can't find distributors abroad in particular. And that's a trend that's been confirmed. That means that certain films which interest foreign distributors and hence foreign exhibitors may suffer. There are fewer exporters who benefit from this income. Income is being concentrated in the hands of certain exporters, and certain exporters have suffered, continue to suffer, and they're a bit worried when it comes to the future. What we also observe abroad in terms of concentration, well, it's not so much this distributor compared with the smaller one. What we note increasingly is that there's cooperation between distributors. They're sharing the risks, they're sharing the talents too. Some are better when it comes to programming, others when it comes to marketing, and they join forces. And that also leads to a kind of concentration in the choice of films, because they have to agree to choose just one film. It's not each entity that chooses one film. I think we can indeed reach 200 million in France, and perhaps a large number of admissions for the French cinema abroad too. So lots of things are happening, and will continue to do so despite the concerns. You were saying that there's quite a positive return on the quality of films, but they're a bit lukewarm. Yeah, we talk to foreign distributors all the time, particularly in Germany. Before the crisis, people said to us, well, France produces films, perhaps develops films too fast, and people were getting a bit tired of what France was proposing in terms of production, because it was perhaps too similar. And this was reflected in the figures with comedies, French comedies, which used to have their natural audience in Germany, and they stopped working that well. German distributors said, well, they don't work as well. In terms of quality, people used to say that the French cinema was no longer reassuring in terms of a value proposition. But this is something people don't say anymore. French films are attractive because of their diversity, what they offer. There's been a strengthening of France when it comes to animation, genre films. This is widely recognized. And I think that this is a sort of guarantee for foreign distributors. Things are really changing. You can see that there's a great deal of trust when it comes to foreign distributors in the French cinema. We have a very strong offering in the near future. We'll be talking with Jérémie about other regulatory battles. We'll also talk about the question of promotion. As you said, this is valid both in France and abroad. How can you provide for better promotion of the cinema in general? Marguerite, when it comes to the international market, you support the French cinema at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs? Yes, one can wonder. Thank you for this invitation. We have a cultural network around the world, which people envy, in fact. We have a service with many professionals in the cinema. I work with the ministry in Paris. We had a network to a degree. We have prepared a map, if we could see it, a map of the network. We have all these attachés around the world. Normally, you should be able to see a map of our cultural network. And then we have people dedicated to the cinema and audiovisual arts. That's the second map. I don't know whether you can see it. We are talking about 45 people who cover 95 states and territories. We have Émile Besson, who's here and who's in charge of the cinema in particular. We have the Institut Français, which is the right hand of the French Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs. It does many decisive things when it comes to providing a whole lot of tools to this network so people can fulfill their mission and propose, in particular, a special programming of films. This network comprises 67 movie theaters, not all dedicated to the cinema exclusively. They're often multi-purpose venues with digital equipment. They can project films under very good circumstances. We're talking about 13,000 seats. So when we have a combined activity, we can talk about the biggest cinema in the world. We have 35 people in charge of these venues. They are here in Paris. Some of them are in the room, so you can go out and meet them. 4 of these movie theaters have the Europa Cinema label. They're very close to you. Bucharest, Prague, Berlin, and London in particular. And sometimes these are movie theaters, national ones, like in Gabon. Embassies where you don't have the network often work with professionals and exhibitors, like in Sweden, for example. I don't know whether I should stop here. No, I have a question. How do you work with professionals? Or do they work sufficiently with you? Do they use you sufficiently, your services? You said, do they call on you enough? I think they do, yes. Just to talk about the action of the ministry, there are 2 main thrusts. We have the promotion of the French cinema abroad. That's the historic mission of the ministry. And we have a task that's less well known. We work on the structuring of the audiovisual and cinema market abroad. That's also a very interesting thing. Oh, here, I can see the map appearing. Here you have the audiovisual attachés in the world. You can pinpoint the territories of interest to you. We work a lot with professionals, of course, in embassies. In Paris, we have our privileged partners. I'm thinking in particular about Unifrance, the Institut Français, and the CNC, of course, who are all relay points. When it comes to the dissemination of films, all these theaters promote films, heritage films too, and they're obviously in contact with distributors, French producers. So the idea is not necessarily to block the network. There are all sorts of innovative missions. I'm thinking about Rome during the pandemic, where there are dedicated projections and screenings for local players who can't travel. So all this, of course, is being built closely with the professionals. We have another example. The studies published by Unifrance. The idea is to provide figures, to find partner platforms for festivals, for example, finance the subtitling of French films in order to reach out to local publics. The Institut Français is in daily contact, too. They propose films to people within the network. About 100 titles per year are bought. These are non-commercial rights, which theaters can then project. The idea is to flesh out the French ecosystem, and also we have a partnership with Europa Cinema. The idea is to measure the results of this network of venues and also to provide information on admissions. You can see the number of admissions and also other information pertaining to turnover, which also helps professionals. And then there's another point that is worthwhile, namely co-production. This is a real professional tool. It was said in the preceding roundtable. You can see this in art house cinema. We're talking about one out of two films. We have all these co-production agreements that you work on with the CNC, JÉRÉMIE today. This remains a main thrust for development when it comes to the French cinema. I think there are about 61 co-productions. Is that it? Is my microphone working? Yes, we have 61 co-production agreements for the cinema. This is a major thrust for development. We sign co-production agreements with the countries that share our values. That's an essential point. In other words, our values in terms of cultural diversity and cultural exception. The French policy, internationally speaking, you can see here, is based on these two main pillars: defend the uniqueness and diversity of the offering, and co-production is a tool to promote all this. We work together with professionals in other countries to further these values. When it comes to the financing of the French cinema, do you think there is more and more foreign money? That's a very good question, and thank you for asking it. Yes. What is definite is that foreign money co-production can make it possible to round off financing. It's true of the cinema, it's true of the audiovisual world in general. Historically speaking, audiovisual work was less based on co-production because financing was available nationally. But given the ramping up of series and this kind of work, there's a need for foreign financing too. What we also try to develop and encourage is agreements and international meetings around the year. This takes place in Canada and elsewhere. These are co-productions that are not just financial. The idea is to ensure that professionals in various countries work together, and films, the work produced, series and other things can have an impact when it comes to dissemination in the various co-producing countries. That's a question I might go back to later on. The circulation of films in Europe and internationally. The amount of foreign investment, Johan, you have some interesting figures. You talked about 380 million. That's co-production. Yes. 240 million euros. That's foreign investment through co-production. So this figure has increased. Of course, 2020 figures were low, so we've been catching up compared with that. Co-production, 140 international co-productions in 2021. This dropped to 80 in 2020, 110, 120 prior to the pandemic. So that's quite a phenomenon. There's more and more international co-production. This entails financial interests in terms of development, and things are changing. Foreign distributors are starting to say, I'm not just going to buy the film, I want to co-produce it, because they'll be able to keep the rights. You have this idea of ownership of the work. This is what distributors, co-producers, and exporters are thinking about now, too. That may explain the phenomenon. There are complex films with more and more people involved, so you tend to have more and more co-producers who have a stake in the film. Jérémie? In 2020, 2021, foreign investment trends were dropping, but in terms of co-production, figures are moving up. Thank you. As Lionel was saying, we have all these regulations in France when it comes to supporting the cinema. We're not talking only about France, so we're talking perhaps about Europe too. People talk about strategic cultural assets. Could you explain what this is all about? And what's the aim of this approach? In fact, in general, when it comes to future prospects, I'd like to say that there are four main challenges today linked to the various topics we've been discussing, and this includes strategic cultural assets. The four challenges are as follows. You have the resilience of the industry in the face of the crisis. That was addressed by Richard, HÉLÈNE, and LIONEL. One can be fairly optimistic in terms of prospects. I hope that if we have 155, 160 million admissions, that will be a success this year, 2022. We have also learned with the pandemic, as we emerge from it, we've also learned to work on the resilience of the industry. We can respond to changes and challenges. The health crisis isn't finished everywhere. There may be other crises. I don't want to depress everyone if I say this, but we're just at the beginning. According to the IPCC, we're at the beginning of many different challenges. And then there is a second major challenge, the circulation of work and the visibility of work, the discoverability of European work. How can we ensure that the work we produce is as visible as possible? That's true for movie theaters. Europa Cinema is deeply involved in this. It ensures that the films circulate and are seen by European publics. You have a quota of 30% broadcasting of films, but we have to ensure that films are actually known. People talk about them. That's work that has to be done on a European level. The idea is to ensure that European films are really seen by the public. And we talked about cinema education. People have to be educated in how to see images. And then there's another issue I wanted to talk about. There's a third main challenge, the singularity of films. How can we continue to create a special, unique European films? What we see internationally is this issue of intellectual property rights. It's essential today, as we can see. Well, we note that European companies, European creators need to have intellectual property rights over work financed in Europe. That's a big issue on the international market today. 2 months ago, I was in South Korea for the International Busan Festival. What people are buying is intellectual property rights now. That's what accounts for the value of the film. It's the catalog value. And this is the kind of value we should be able to continue to create. We need to really implement our national and international policy goals, namely cultural diversity. This is important internationally. Work financed by big international players can benefit from intellectual property rights. For us, a political objective we defend in Europe, linked to this idea of strategic cultural assets, well, what we want to do is to ensure that European films owners continue to retain the rights and the values linked thereto. And there's a further issue I want to mention. And it's true of the last 2 years, ever since we've been president of the EU. I want to refer to this notion of strategic cultural assets. We have noted that there is a risk in terms of some cultural assets. Value has been created by players in the industry. I'm thinking about the catalog of films, for example. We try to protect that in France. I'm thinking about studios for shooting films, video game studios, certain movie theaters. There's a risk. These strategic cultural assets, because they account for the value, inherent value of our culture and our industry. Well, the danger is that these assets be acquired by foreign entities, people from outside Europe, and people from other continents. And these people may mean that the real cultural value of these assets disappears. For the catalog of films, we know, as this has already occurred, that a company outside Europe may buy a whole catalog of films and then can either divide it up or deprive the European public of access to it, in all or in part, only make use of certain leading assets and not others. For example, a blockbuster from a given time, but you wouldn't be able to see films which bring in less money but have a lot of cultural value. We're trying to ensure that we can think about how to protect these cultural assets. This was decided by the European Union, by the Council of Ministers in April 2022. A decision was taken to reflect on the matter. The link with the topics today is that we have to try to work on all this. We have to try to see how we can protect movie theaters from this risk. And when I say we have to work on this, I'm really sincere. We have to think together about the nature of the risk, its scope, and what we can do to ensure that movie theaters remain movie theaters, because they could be bought and used for something different. There shouldn't be any pressure either on programming, because maybe foreign buyers might take over the assets and then put pressure in terms of programming. Well, I agree entirely with what Jérémie has just said. This, for us, is a very important topic. And we haven't really decided to take action yet. We understand the risk in terms of the catalog, but the risk for a movie theater is a building. You can't move a building. French movie theaters have to respect a certain number of regulations. You can't just open a movie theater like that. There are all sorts of procedures you have to abide by. You also have to abide by certain rules in terms of programming. You can't do any old thing. Also, the movie theaters also channel some of the royalties. These sums of money are then fed back into the industry. And this is money that shouldn't go to foreign investors. There are a couple of movie theaters. There's one in Paris in particular, which is currently being totally renovated by an American. We're happy that person is here and is prepared to do this work. There is one movie theater overseas, which is operated by an American network, and I don't have the impression that this movie theater fails to respect the French commitments. Obviously, it's necessary to identify the risk and see what's happening. We truly believe that when it comes to movie theaters, however, there isn't that much of a risk, but of course we'll be happy to work with the CNC in order to find solutions if necessary.
There are other subjects, such as Windows, for instance. There will be discussions in a few days. So what do you want on this respect? What we want is, how shall I express this? I was about to say something stupid. But the first thing, Windows are an essential part of our activity. Thanks to Windows, I'm sincere in what I'm saying, we are the country in France that resists best. And thanks to this point of Windows, we have noticed that big American operators have destroyed value. Theaters today create value for a film, for instance, but above all, to screen the film, to give the film this special image that theaters can convey to a film. So this point is mainly negotiated by professionals, and it's a huge effort by all professionals. Of course, everyone's grumbling, everyone's shooting at everyone else, but finally, agreements are being signed. And nowhere else in the world you have a TV channel like Canal+, which is so important. Nowhere else in the world you have such a wide and large number of theaters and such diversity in films. And we have an agreement on Windows, certainly not perfect, but applicable until 2025. So my wish would be that we don't change this present system until 2025. As far as the main points of this agreement are concerned. And also, the French language makes it possible to be understood differently by various people. So we have to be a little bit more precise in this respect. That's we will do next week in this great meeting that we'll have on this point of Windows. People have been discussing together. People have been thinking that certain solutions should be found, should be agreed upon, and especially for certain films. And regarding the first 4 months specially reserved to theaters, it is important that we work on various points, that we may agree on certain derogations, and on these two subjects, I'm sure we're going to be working. But for the rest, we hope that the agreement on Windows will be stable until February 2025. It's a great pleasure to have meetings between professionals, but we should not spend too much time on Windows. So we need stability in this respect. It's not really the case today as far as stability is concerned. Things are changing. The industry is changing. Financial matters are changing too. So we have to change the system maybe faster than we thought. Well, maybe that's your opinion, certainly. But I do not feel that going too fast is a great thing. I don't think we have to go faster. I think time should be taken. We should take time. We are always criticizing various systems in place, and one of the great change that the crisis has fostered is that films stay longer in theaters. Films are less instantaneous as they used to be. November, for instance. November is a film that continues having admissions. No one, when November was screened, is Cannes. No one would have thought that November would have more admissions than Bac Nord. And we have multi-programs here, and those films. Simone, for instance. The career of Simone is great, not only for schools, but Simone will be at least until the end of the year in theaters. So let's stop thinking that being modern implies being fast. We can do things slowly. And 3 years until 25 is not really a long lapse of time. I do not believe that Windows is an obstacle today. I feel it's a great thing, a great system. Of course, the role of platforms may change, but we should be careful, and we should not necessarily go faster and faster all the time. We should remember that the present system is based on a certain balance, and in the present agreement, platforms can have 12 months if they finance more, and we'll be happy, and everyone will be. You want to say a word? I will not repeat what Richard said on the importance of Windows. As far as we are concerned, since the 80s, this agreement on Windows has made it possible for theaters to continue their development, and we needed to change the present balance, and this system is not perfect, but yet it is, thanks to this system, possible to continue and work together, whereas it is very difficult to work together. And when we signed this agreement on Windows in 2022, there was a clause of negotiating again certain points, so that we should work again on the agreement. So I agree with you, we should not go too fast in this matter. We should take time. We should give a chance for films to be screened in theaters, but things are moving very fast, internationally speaking, technically speaking as well. and great operators, there was a risk that operators would no longer want films to be screened in theaters. When Richard says that we should find the right balance, strike the right balance between various goals, various desires, then this is necessary maybe to change the agreement. The free VOD may possibly dominate in coming years, and maybe VOD with publicity, and we may have to renegotiate agreements on Windows. The beauty of this agreement is that we have to meet again and on the same hall, not even on internet. So what do distributors think? Well, I agree. I feel that this agreement leaves room for change according to the level of investments, for instance. There are more possibilities in the framework of this agreement than what we think generally. The agreement does protect theaters. It's a great work. It's the basis of our work, and every professional will benefit from this. It's a great tool, and everyone can benefit from this, especially TV channels. The film being screened in a theater is more attractive than a film which is not screened in theaters. And people will want to see the film again, maybe on a Sunday evening on television. So we have to be quite aware of secondary markets. The distributor, the editor, when he wants to screen a film in theater, he takes a risk, as in the past. But we have less. We have minus 30% in France as far as admissions are concerned. So it is more and more risky to make money with theaters. So distributors today have to think of secondary markets. Obviously, video just after the window for theaters. It's not a great market, it's not very dynamic, but it's still something. So we put our attention on videos. This should not disappear. It helps us. And the third point are television and platforms. If theater screenings and are a bit weak, distributors will be more keen to invest on platforms or television channels. So we all should benefit from this. So the promotion is quite an important point to reach the 200 million admissions such as Richard dreams of. We will have to work hard for this. What can we do to reach this goal? Certainly, again, it's a matter of desire. We need a desire to go to a theater. We have to leave our comfortable home. We have to go to a theater. We have to pay. We have to go through this immersion of seeing a film with other viewers. So our distributors do a great job. Marketing campaigns change. As theaters, we have a major role to play. theaters are some kind of an addiction. It's great to see a few minutes on other films. It's great. We feel that maybe tomorrow we'll go back to a theater to see this film. So we have the publicity of cinema and television, which was not allowed, but we're doing experiments. So we have new behaviors. And it is true that in theaters we have to work hard. It's not that we don't work hard, but yet we have to work harder, because the job of an exhibitor is quite different today as it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago. We just put posters on our windows and people would come in. But today, obviously, we have a great job to do, a fantastic job to do on social networks, on platforms. We're not present enough on networks. Great groups of exhibitors do a great job. There is an independent role to play. We have to know our own public, and we have to work on these new tools. We should not forget, as I said a few minutes ago, that we work with passion. We foster desire. We should not sacrifice everything to statistics. Of course, mediators are important. It's necessary to work as mediators. Today, we need to continue our development, and this is a job which needs a lot of competency. We should know architecture, we should know marketing, we should know how to animate a debate, we should write, we should welcome people, we should know how to do everything that we have to do, and many more things too. We also should go to training sessions for ourselves, for our own sake. And today it is quite difficult to find people, and today it is difficult for exhibitors to recruit, because it is difficult to find people who can do all this. Besides, we have to work evenings and weekends, so it is hard to find employees who will accept these working conditions. And we do have difficulties as far as recruitment of employees is concerned. So these are the various points that I wanted to raise. Marguerite, you wanted to raise a point? I wanted to mention also education in the field of cinema. We train tomorrow's spectators. South Korea has done a great job in this respect. This has a great success. The Ministry for Education in Korea has done a great job. So it aims at diversifying publics. We can do this in France too, and in Korea they work with local authorities. Institut Français is also having a European Film Factory program. There are other institutes that are working on this. They have had 17,500 screenings, and they have also reached more than 200,000 young people. So we're working on this too at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs in France. France is inspiring people. We have the cinema evenings, for instance. The first was in Italy in September with 1 million viewers. So this was great for the first edition. In the UK also, they did this. So France is inspiring other countries. In Italy, they were inspired by France. They're working on Windows too. So this work on programming is great. We have private operators. On Mobi also, we may have once a week or once a month, I don't remember, the possibility to go to a theater. So there are many things to do. In Italy, for instance, I don't know whether this has been validated. When someone goes to see a film, which is an Italian film, the price is less than for foreign films. Instead of €7, for instance, if it's an Italian film in Italy, screened in Italy, the price drops down to €3 or €4. Hélène, what will distributors have to change in their way of working to reach a higher audience? There are investments in marketing. The average figure is €472,000 per film, which is very high, and is higher than previous years. We could have thought that distributors would have spent less in times of crisis, but it's not the case. So what will distributors have to do or to change or to improve in order to reach a public again? The difficulty is that this is the right time to spend for the public to be attracted towards theaters again. And this is the time when the subsidies from the government are being stopped for employee salaries, for instance, or so this is being stopped, and now we will have this will have a great impact on distributor. The crisis will start impacting distributors in the coming weeks and months. So we will want to ask the government the fact that we will benefit from a tax break for activities of edition, for instance. Smaller companies will try to screen certain art films, will need to have to benefit from subsidies. Otherwise, they will not continue. So the distributor plays a key role. That's the first point. Second point. Today, we need marketing, we need a promotion in real time. Social networks make it possible. But according to the results of a film, we may adapt the marketing towards the public. We have to work hand in hand with exhibitors to have more data on the results of certain films, what happens during screenings, how many people show up, and we have to, when someone goes to a theater, we have to know what happens, such as platforms, for instance. We have to know more on people. We have to try and make them come back to the same theater and to maintain the link. And theaters are well placed for this. And we should all try and use data much more, respecting obviously the rules. We have to do more in this respect. We'll not possibly work as efficiently as big data will, but we have something to do. Then, how will distributor work on films? I have discussed about this in our federation. Lacking budget today, distributors will be more strict when they choose films. They will think more in terms of targets as far as the public is concerned. Is this film for a large city or for a small city? Is this a film for young audiences? For instance, is this film close to video games, or has this film anything to do with mangas, because this pleases young people? We should have a real added value and try and target our own public. You're right, we have distributors who have specialized, for instance, in films from India or films for Catholics, etc. So, pertaining to data, it's always been a problem between distributors and exhibitors. You may now join forces in this regard. I don't know if this will make us join forces, because we already have joined forces. Obviously, we are not very transparent. Although we have data, we know what happens at 9 o'clock at Les Halles. This is the Bible for us. I would really like to know what happens in stadiums of football stadiums, for instance. What happens on a Thursday morning, for instance. But we know what happens on a Thursday morning at 9. Data is a great tool, has great qualities. However, data has a tendency to make everything standard. We have to do something for the majority, forgetting others. I do understand that a producer, a distributor, and an exhibitor may wish to program a screening of a film that will lead to more admissions, rather than a film that will make less admissions. But what we hear on platforms, we have the same public. We're not really competitors with platforms, but our offer, our quality offer, is more interesting than that of platforms. And today, the quality of the offer of platforms is less interesting as what it used to be some time ago. I do believe in distributors and producers, like producers who do produce with their heart something that they like. I could give you dozens of examples, and I do admire producers, and I'm not really sure that data could lead to the production of certain films. I really certain great films. I do like the fact that producers do start projects because they have a passion for it. Well, the point is how to identify spectators with data. But the goal is to lead to a better optimization. Of course, we should improve our performance. I am not really sure that if we know everything about a cinema goer, what he does at a certain point during screening, if he blinks his eyes or something, I don't know whether data on all of these details will improve our work. We are craftsmen, and I am really sorry to note that certain films that I love find no public, and I don't know why. But sometimes we have films that no one had noticed and have great success. So that's all I'm saying. We should stay what we are, that is, craftsmen. And producers in France and distributors too have this role to play, to work as craftsmen. They can program a great film that no one has noticed, and this will not stem from data, this will stem from passion.
I think we probably think along the same lines, but I wanted to refer to speed of reaction. There's something Richard said which is very important. In the French regulations, you have the independence of production. The guarantee of the independence of producers is a major safeguard. It's very effective. The films that emerge are independent ones put forward by people where they have a financial and regulatory framework which provides for a freedom of creation. That's very important. And then it's up to us to carry the films as far as we can. Marguerite and Yuan, abroad in terms of exhibition, have you noted the same propensity? Working more with data, have you seen some interesting initiatives when it comes to the countries that you supervise? Yes, in the UK, clearly. Digital marketing has a definite role to play when it comes to release plans. These are key items of expenditure when it comes to online marketing, rather than traditional marketing in the press or buying a spot on the radio. That's very important in the UK. And there's also matches a drop in editorial expenses. You spend less to release the film. People stop spending on the traditional media, which don't bring in sufficient numbers of spectators. So the idea is to think about how films should be released and the marketing strategy. People focus expenditure, less expenditure, they focus it on online marketing. We've seen the same thing in Germany, and German distributors, they also are thinking along these lines. I might round off what you've said. In the network of venues we have around the world, obviously we are in special local environments. With some of the venues, we have electronic ticketing now. People ask us for advice. Sometimes there are difficulties because you have issues pertaining to applying local VAT. It's not easy to work in environments that are legally and fiscally very different. You need to have a very detailed knowledge of the public. You need to know about the venue. We have subscribers, for example, to the Mediatheque, the media library, and the idea is to have a link with the movie theaters to encourage them to go to the cinema. So our ambassadors are often in a difficult situation. The technological situation in the country may or may not be well advanced. I'd also like to underscore the importance of co-production when it comes to the movie theaters too. We haven't talked about that much. In France, we have a world record. We have major tools like Cinéma du Monde. We have schemes to discover young foreign talent, and that will lead then to co-production. I think these are very useful tools. It helps people to go and watch the French cinema. It also provides a fabulous image, reputation. It gives a good reputation to the French cinema. A lot of these films couldn't have been made without French co-producers. And so we can really highlight French cinema abroad, taking account of this dimension that is co-produced films. We talked about that earlier on. It's now 1 film out of 2 in the art house world. Look at the selection in Cannes. You have a French participation in most of the films. Are there any questions in the room? Any questions you want to address to the speakers? Yes, go ahead. Laurent Dutoit. I'm an exhibitor in Geneva and a distributor in Switzerland. I'm glad to see how optimistic people are when it comes to this side of the border. I'd like to share that optimism, but it's more difficult. I have the impression in most of the other European countries, and this is the same in France. You have a lot of state support, a lot of support during the pandemic, which now has disappeared. If next year we don't have 200 million admissions or just 150 or 170, will the movie theaters in the network still be there? People are thinking very positively, but if the market doesn't improve, what will really happen? I have a question to Richard Patry. What about co-production? I imagine the situation is very diverse. You have some independent movie theaters, art house movie theaters, theaters that belong to big groups. Do you have a percentage? Can you view the future in an optimistic light? Because what I find in Switzerland is that if you remove the municipal movie theaters, which get support, most of the independent movie theaters, art house movie theaters, only get 3% subsidies in terms of the overall budget. And with just 3% subsidies and a box office that's dropped by 30% in the year, if you can't find a way of offsetting that, well, then most of the movie theaters will have to shut. Well, that's a vast question. Well, the share of subsidies, you have to see what you view as a subsidy, in fact. You have the backbone, which is financial support from the cinematographic industry. The cinemas collect a tax on the price of tickets. This tax is collected then by the CNC. I think it's a good thing. We consider this as public money. Maybe it's not just a state tax, it's just sort of our own joint money. And by collecting this tax, the CNC can then redistribute it. It can finance a certain number of programs, support schemes for other sectors like distribution, production. There are all sorts of mechanisms which can benefit. And also the movie theaters. This enables them to maintain the right level of investment. I'd just like to say a few words about that. I was talking about everything that movie theaters were planning to do. In the next few years, there's a huge ecological challenge to overcome. Movie theaters will have to become greener. Like all other players in society, will have to be eco-responsible, environmentally responsible, and that's not a minor issue. Replacing projectors, for example, using projectors that use less energy, laser projectors, for example, which use less energy and which don't need air conditioning, so that can save a lot of energy. 400 million euros is going to have to be invested over the years to come to deal with the matter of saving the environment and saving energy. There are a huge number of challenges to rise to. The CNC is deeply involved thanks to this backbone, which is this tax, because movie theaters get between 30 and 70% of the sums invested in order to renovate and maintain their theaters. And that's true of all movie theaters, be they big or small in France. That's a vital point. And it accounts for the economic balance of our movie theaters. And then there are other selective mechanisms. For movie theaters, the main mechanism, the main state subsidy from the CNC is the art house one, which is well endowed. Of course, there are lots of incentives. Things may have to be revisited, but 18 million euros is what we're talking about. So this is quite a generous mechanism for movie theaters, and it makes it possible to support them in this work. Third point, you have all the subsidies on a local level, and in particular for the French movie theaters. That's nearly a third of movie theaters is directly or indirectly linked to the local governments. You have municipal movie theaters, which are financed exclusively through state money, and then you have all sorts of other things. Almost every movie theater has its own status. Some are totally private. The owner owns the walls. And then you have municipal movie theaters, and between these two extremes, you have a certain number of systems like concessions and associations. In Brittany, for example, there are a huge number of associations, volunteers who run the movie theaters and do wonderful work. So it's hard to give you an exact percentage. Now, as to being optimistic, I believe you have to think in terms of the group. If we ourselves are not convinced of what we're proposing to the public, if we don't think it's the most beautiful thing in the world, I wouldn't say you have to change your job, but you really have to change your mindset. The crisis isn't over. We now have the energy crisis, and of course, what the COVID crisis taught us, it's something unique in the world. It's the very first time that movie theaters were shut, 300 days in the case of France. That never happened before. And that taught us to go step by step. We're fortunate, and I think this will continue, because the cinema in France is a national treasure. French people are deeply attached to their movie theaters and to their films. And we're fortunate because we have an interlocutor, the CNC, the Ministry for Culture, and we are constantly discussing things with these two entities. I firmly believe that if we're hit by another crisis, we'll have people who will help us to move forward. Subsidies, preceding subsidies have disappeared, of course. If suddenly there's a huge problem, like the energy challenge, there's a real problem now. We're keeping a careful eye on the situation. We're constantly informing the government of the situation, because we believe that the cinema is a real national treasure, and the government, we think, will help us if all of a sudden we really have a huge challenge to take up. I think it's time to wind up the morning. Thank you very much for having taken up this invitation. Thank you for having set aside your time and attending this. And I wish you a very successful conference for the rest of the day.